Hey, so first of all, happy St. Patrick's Day to any Irish viewers. Have a good day and go easy on the old black stuff. Um, I want to talk about women in politics. Now, I imagine this is going to be a controversial video because often people don't watch a whole video, and that's fine, but the downside to that is that sometimes they take a snapshot of something and they don't consider all the points. So that's why I'm careful to make disclaimers on videos like this. Um, and the disclaimer here is that in no way do I want anyone to think that I'm generalizing. And in no way do I want anyone to think that I'm hostile to the idea of women in politics at all. That's not what this video is about. Rather, it's an observation of some of the narrative I've been hearing from women politicians. So I'll give an example. Liz Truss, who's a cabinet member, she is Chief Secretary to the Treasury. I came across a report in yesterday's Times where she was talking about mansplaining. And she claimed that she's experienced sexism almost every day since she got into Parliament. Now, to me, that is quite a drastic claim to make. Experience sexism almost every day. Now, with a statement like that, you would think that, I mean, that's how the Times reported it. You would think that is a situation whereby misogynistic men are constantly sort of talking down to women and constantly using sexist language. Now, I'm not in cabinet meetings, so I can't say what goes on there. But I will go out on a limb here and say this. Quite frankly, I think there are some women politicians who have a chip on their shoulder, and you see them in all parties. Now, before you shoot me down, any feminists watching this, or any women, there are women politicians I admire and respect. But in my view, the strongest women politicians are those who don't play their gender card, who don't constantly put out this narrative, it's because I'm a woman. I mean, I think a victimhood narrative from anyone gets tiresome. Anyone. I mean, a man who would constantly complain, it's because I'm a man, that also gets tiresome. Or because I'm black, because I'm white, whatever it is. Victimhood narratives, they're not entirely without basis because society isn't fair and there are injustices in society. But when it becomes the whole mantra, it gets a bit tiresome. So if what Liz Truss is saying is true, if she's really experiencing sexism every day, wouldn't this be a major scandal? I suspect basically some of her male colleagues have disagreed with her and she doesn't like it. I can't prove that, but that's what I speculate because very often when women talk about mansplaining, which itself is a very derogatory term in my view, it's basically, oh, a man disagreed with me, I don't like it. So they distort that as he's talking down to me. Politics is power. And frankly, if you're going to take an attitude every time someone disagrees with you, as that's patronizing, then how do you expect any sort of dialogue? I believe there are double standards in politics insofar as we often hear women politicians complaining about, oh, he's talking down to me because I'm a woman. And the speakers often reprimanded male MPs for discourteous language, and sometimes that's been valid. It's been a valid critique. And yet, um, women MPs get away with blatantly rude language. That seems to be a-okay. I'll give an example of this. There was an exchange a while back between Emily Thornberry and David Lidington. And Thornbury was using some pretty rude language about Liddington. Um, Not a word from the Speaker. Yet, when another MP gave her the wrong title, that male MP got reprimanded. I can't remember who it was, but it was a male MP. Now, maybe that is unparliamentary, he should have got it right, but I think there's double standards there, and I think the Speaker, is frankly virtue signalling. I think he's a pretty good Speaker overall. I quite like Burkle, but I do think he's biased towards female members because female members put so much pressure on him, well, on their colleagues to show that they're not sexist. But the byproduct of this is double standards. I had a difference of opinion with a friend of mine recently, and she's actually a reasonable feminist. She's not like one of these hysterical man haters, nothing of the sort. But I said that one of the reasons Thatcher had a downfall, I mean, Thatcher was strong because she didn't necessarily use very vocal feminism in her drive to the top. I mean, many women say that she let down women, and it's interesting that in her whole 11 years in power, she only appointed one other woman to the cabinet, Baroness Young. But anyway, the point I made was one of the reasons Thatcher fell in 1990 was she got very arrogant, and she became rather tyrannical actually with her own cabinet. She constantly kind of talked over them. I mean, that phrase, the tigress, um, surrounded by hamsters, I believe it was obviously hyperbole, but I think it was true insofar as she was a very confrontational figure. And in the end, it was that persona I think that her colleagues just found intolerable. At the time of the poll tax riots, I think power just went to her head. And Thatcherites, I think, need to just accept that. I mean, when Geoffrey Howe resigned, he was a Thatcher loyalist. This was an experienced minister, he was no pushover. So anyway, I made that point. My feminist friend was like, "Oh, I agree with everything about Thatcher, but she agreed what I said about the poll tax, but not about her domineering personality." But actually, that's well documented. And I think the point she made is because she's a woman, and but put it this way: if a male prime minister, and actually we have an example of this, Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown was accused of bullying at one point, and it became something of a scandal. Now, it may be true. Maybe Brown was a bit domineering in his persona. I don't know. I'm not in cabinet meetings. But it's no different from the attitude that Thatcher took. So why is it Thatcher was portrayed as a strong woman, Brown was portrayed as a bully? What's the difference? Why wasn't Thatcher portrayed as a bully? I don't see a difference. Um, Now, there is an argument that because women are a minority in Parliament, and they are, the numbers have increased, but they are still a minority, then they have to be tough to survive in a man's world. So I accept that there is probably unique challenges for women parliamentarians that male parliamentarians don't necessarily face. I accept that. Um, what I don't accept is that every time they are challenged or every time one of their male colleagues disagrees with them, then, oh, it's patronizing or it's mansplaining. I mean, that term mansplaining needs to be dissected because when women come up with it, when feminists come up with it, it's basically a way to try and silence debate. That's how I interpret it. If you're going to have a chip on your shoulder, if you're going to be that sensitive every time someone disagrees with you, you shouldn't be in politics, quite frankly. I'm not talking about situations where there is blatant sexism and where a man really is talking down to a female colleague. I'm not saying it never happens, but I do believe that, I mean, when Liz Truss says she's experienced sexism every day, really? No, I'm sorry, I just find that hard to believe. At least sexism, not in the sense of the loaded term that it is. What she is probably talking about is that she's had arguments with male colleagues every day, and that's politics. I mean, You can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, we demand to be treated the same as men, but we want special treatment because we're women. Male colleagues get called names. Male colleagues get male parliamentarians get lots of heat. So what's the difference? I mean, I will say this. I think sometimes the Commons can be like a big playground, and it's a bit pathetic when you get not only adults, but people who are elected into a position of responsibility, shouting down colleagues and acting frankly like a bunch of football hooligans. And probably that is mainly male parliamentarians. So that behaviour, I would agree, that needs to, tone down. I don't want a parliament that's completely mute. You need rigorous debate. But when a member's trying to speak and people are just heckling them, I think it does put the public off. It's stupid. And frankly, they should know better. So I can understand that being off putting to women who want to get into parliament. But what I don't like is the double standards, the fact that male politicians are being criticised for things that women politicians also do, i.e., petty insults. And the problem is, I think it's putting men in a position whereby they're going to be ultra careful about disagreeing with female colleagues because they'll think they're going to be accused of sexism. I mean, sexism just gets thrown around these days like racism. It's a loaded term. So when Liz Truss says she gets sexist abuse every day, I think it's her responsibility to elaborate on that and explain exactly what she means by it. Then the report didn't clarify that. Jess Phillips is another feminist MP who has made a huge issue out of this. Now, to be fair, I'm well aware that female MPs have got some pretty disgusting online abuse. Rape threats and so on, that is disgusting. But let's look at Jess Phillips for a second. She's been called quirky, radical. She's had all these positive attributes from the press. And yet, if a male MP spoke the way she does, he would just be called obnoxious. So why the double standards? I mean, I remember when Corbyn first got in, and this has got nothing to do with Corbyn's politics, by the way. Forget Corbyn's politics for a second. She said, "Why do we have to have an old white man?" Now, imagine a male MP saying, "Oh, why do we have to have a woman leader?" He would be deselected on the spot, plus face a major media storm. Jess Phillips has displayed casual anti-male sexism more than once. During a committee on International Men's Day, she was smirking while the issue of male suicide was being discussed. And, I don't think she should get away with stuff like that. That doesn't condone, rape threats online. People who are doing that are sick losers, and, I would never ever condone that. But I am tired of feminist double standards, and I think by nature, a lot of women involved in politics are feminists. I totally support the principle of women in politics. And actually, this country has a long history of strong women leaders. I mean, going back to Boudica, Queen Elizabeth I, Mary Queen of Scots, Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth II for that matter, um, Margaret Thatcher, and to a lesser extent Theresa May. We've had a long history of significant women leaders. So I don't think Britain's alien to that idea. I mean, we now mark 101 years since the Representation of the People Act, which gave suffrage to women. Actually, it wasn't all women. It wasn't until 1929 that was universal. It was only women who were middle class had landed property. So the true universal suffrage came, I believe, it was either, if my history serves me right, it was either 26 or 29, which was far too late. I believe New Zealand was actually the first country to grant women suffrage back in 1895. Um, so women had to struggle for that. And, the suffragettes really did go through a lot of struggles, force feeding in prisons and so on. They had different approaches. Some of them, frankly, took what today would be, frankly, considered terrorist approaches of sending parcel bombs and so on to the Prime Minister's house. I believe they sent one to Lloyd George's house. Um, Others took a more peaceful approach, and the Pankhurst themselves, um, Emmeline Pankhurst and her older daughter Sylvia, took a different approach from, I believe it was Christabel, who became a pacifist. So those early suffragettes, weren't all of one political persuasion. It is interesting that the first woman MP, Nancy Astor, was a Tory. But anyway, again, I don't want to be misunderstood. By no means am I generalizing, but I think, people who rise above their demographic, I have respect for. Take, for example, the Home Secretary. He happens to be a man of South Asian heritage and he's a Muslim. But he never makes an issue out of that. He's pretty secular, and those are facts. It was history making, but he never makes an issue out of it. And when Margaret Thatcher became the first woman prime minister, of course it was going to be newsworthy. But I think one of Thatcher's strengths was she never had self pity. She never had a chip on her shoulder. It's because I'm a woman, and I give her credit for that. There are certain women MPs who, frankly, just seem too sensitive. I mean, I find it very hard to believe that in 2019 male MPs would risk being so obnoxious because in the current environment, it would be a major media scandal. Their comments would be plastered all over. I just don't think they would risk it. And don't get me wrong, there are certain male MPs who are dinosaurs and they probably do have regressive attitudes. But I think when I hear women MPs talking about mansplaining, I immediately think you've got a chip on your shoulder. And I just think that get over yourselves. Politics is tough. And if you're going to be that sensitive every time, a male colleague disagrees with you, then. And what is patronizing anyway? One person's patronizing is someone else just disagreeing. I mean, Liz Truss said that most of the time is taken by men talking, but if there are more men, then naturally, by statistics, there's going to be more time with men talking. I don't think that necessarily means that they're talking over their female colleagues. If they are, that's. I mean, I think we've come a long way since when Margaret Thatcher did become an MP in the early days, when that really was an issue back in the 40s and 50s. But we're in the 2010s now. We're almost in the 2020s. I just don't believe it's anywhere near as bad as feminists make it out to be. And I think by constantly promoting this victimhood narrative, it's not helping women. It's not going to inspire women to get into politics because they're going to think it's some sort of awful, overbearing patriarchy. And I just don't think it's that bad. Now, okay, I'm not there, but let me just say this. If it is as bad as Liz Truss makes it out to be, wouldn't we be hearing about some massive scandal? If her male colleagues were really saying sexist things, wouldn't that be all over the press? So when she says she experiences sexism every day, frankly, I think she needs to elaborate on that. If it really is a case that you know, male colleagues are being rude to her, that's it's wrong. But mansplaining is itself a derogatory term, and she thinks it's okay to just casually throw that around. I mean, if I disagreed with a woman and she said to me, "Oh, don't mansplain to me," I would say, "What, am I not allowed an opinion? Am I not allowed to disagree with you because you're a woman?" I saw a debate in the Australian Parliament. I don't know the senators involved, but a woman senator used the term mansplaining, and the male senator actually turned that back on her and said, "Well, wait a second. If I use womansplaining, you would immediately say it's sexist." So there should be just some consistency here. And with feminism, there isn't consistency; it's constant victimhood, and it's frankly a little bit pathetic. But more importantly, I think it shackles debate because men are constantly walking on eggshells. They're constantly thinking, "Oh, if I disagree in a robust way, which is politics, then I'm going to be accused of sexism. I'm going to be accused of mansplaining." So I think it's going to shackle debate, and that's not good.